Hello everyone, you're watching Whatsnewla, and I'm here next to beautiful, amazing author, Naomi Ragen.
Hi everybody.
Hi, Naomi.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
There are a lot of women jealous now. Why I'm sitting here and like I have the chance to ask you everything I want. And I just want you just to begin with a few bestsellers of yours.
You want me to tell you what I think were my bestsellers?
Yes.
Well, they were all bestsellers. That's the truth.
Woo!
Every single one of them did very well. Some did better than others, but every single one of them were bestsellers. So you want me to tell you the names of my books?
It's not to me, it's to the audience that they really want to...
Well, anybody out there who hasn't read a single one of my books, you are really missing out. Now, I can give you a list of my books, but every single one of them is different. And if you're interested in women in the ultra-Orthodox world, then read what I call my Haredi trilogy, because there are 3 books. The first book I ever wrote was the Jefti's Daughter, and then came Sota, then came The Sacrifice of Tamar. And those were all 3 books about ultra-Orthodox women, and very racy topics. The first one was about wife abuse, the second one was about adultery, and the third one was about rape. And all 3 of these books were based on true stories. I find that I have a lot of, I don't know what you would call it, my inspiration comes from life. It doesn't come from imagination. I know a lot of people like to read, fantasy books, women with green hair that float in the sky, all those South American novels. I never find that that's what inspires me. I'm always inspired by true life, and I read a story in a newspaper about a black baby that's born to an ultra-Orthodox couple, and I want to know all about it, and I want to know what happened, and I want to know how they feel about this black baby, and I want to know what's going to happen to this black baby, and that became my book, The Sacrifice of Tamar. Then after I finished those 3 books, and I got a lot of praise and a lot of flack and a lot of criticism from ultra-Orthodox Jews who were really not as much angry at what I was writing, but the fact that I was writing anything at all, because there was the attitude that, the ultra-Orthodox world is secretive, and, anybody who wants to write about them is a peeping Tom. And I never accepted that. I never felt that that was a valid thing to say. I think that literature is something which the author writes about what they know. And as long as they are faithful to the truth and they treat their subject matter with respect, as I always have, then there's perfectly legitimate for you to write about the ultra-Orthodox world. And there can be no one who treats the ultra-Orthodox world with more respect than I do, because I'm an Orthodox woman and I really know what I'm writing about. But I decided that I was going to take a small break from that, and I wrote a book about a woman at the time of the Inquisition in Spain, who was the richest woman in the world. Her name was Donna Gracia Nasi, and her husband had cornered the spice trade. And she was lending money to the kings of England. She was a banker.
To the king.
she was a woman in her 20s. Her husband passed away from a disease he got on one of his sailing ships. She had a little baby. The Inquisition was coming to Portugal, and she could have very easily married a nobleman in Portugal, and instead she risked her life. She risked the life of her family because she wanted to stay Jewish, and she left. She wanted to save the life of her family, but more than that, she wanted to try to save the lives of other Jews by getting them out of places where the Inquisition was in full force, by using her sailing ships to get them out of Europe and take them to, ironically, where the Arabs were, in places like Constantinople and Istanbul, and, that's where the Arabs were very nice to the Jews at that time. So,
what a research. Wow. How long it takes to research?
It took me 5 years to research this book. I actually traveled all over Spain and to Italy and to London, and I put so much effort into this book because honestly, and this is a little secret between us, at a certain point I really felt that she was communicating with me. Her spirit was communicating with me, and I would walk down streets in Spain and I felt like she was whispering in my ear. It was very eerie and very ironic, but that was a fascinating book to write. And after that, Israel went completely crazy with the peace process, and then they had the Intifada that followed, and the streets of Jerusalem were blowing up. And I myself was at the Park Hotel when there was the Passover massacre. I was upstairs with my family, and after that, the last thing I wanted to do was actually write a book about what was going on in Israel. But there were so many lies that were being told about Israel, and the New York Times and Los Angeles Times and all of them, they just got the story so wrong. They made it look like it was our fault for what was happening, and instead of, the fact that we're being attacked by a bunch of murderers. So I wrote a book called The Covenant, in which I explained, well, it's the story of a young doctor who's kidnapped by the Hamas and how Israel tries to save him. And it was really based a lot on a true story that happened to my neighbor, Esther Waxman. She and I are very good friends, and her son Nachshon was kidnapped. It's a very famous story. I don't have to tell you. And it did not have a happy ending. But I used everything that I remember from those days when we were waiting to hear about him in that book. And as I say, I'm always inspired by life. And there was a book that I published, and it was an autobiographical book, which was the first book that I ever wrote, and I became a writer to write that book, and it was called Chains Around the Grass. And that title of that refers to the housing projects in America where the children aren't allowed to play in the grass because they put chains around the grass, and that's where I grew up. And that book was very close to my heart. But it took me a very long time to figure out what that book was about, because I kept thinking, when you write a book about yourself, you always think you're the hero. It took me years to figure out that I was not the hero of my own book, that there was somebody else who was really the main character and the hero of that story. And you have to read it if you want to know who that is. But a lot of times people tell me that that book really touched them and it spoke to them, because it was true of a lot of us growing up in America at a certain time. The main characters are mostly women. But I think that men can learn a lot from reading my books, and I think that especially The Covenant is an action-adventure story that's as good as any other action-adventure story that men are interested in reading, but I don't consider any of my books chick lit. They're books that are meant for serious readers. I talk about serious subjects. And sometimes they talk about subjects that are not so serious. I wrote a book called The Saturday Wife, which was a total send-up of the affluent Orthodox American Jewish community, and boy, did I get it over the head for that one, because that's my own people. But I felt, I'd written so many critical books about the ultra-Orthodox. Here, the time has come for me to write about my own community. And the book, I would like to tell everyone, because nobody got the joke. It's a satire. No one is that terrible. This is about an Orthodox rabbi and his wife. And she is not supposed to be a Rebbitzin. She's, let's put it this way, she's not spiritual material for Rebbitzin-hood. And a lot of people thought it was a straight book, and they took it seriously. Wildly exaggerated things happen in this book, and they still took it seriously. Like, she decides she's going to start a charity called Handbags for Women, Handbags for Victims of Terror. That was the name of her charity. And she decided that she had seen terrible scenes of destruction in Israel. There was a handbag on the floor surrounded by blood, and she wondered who had lost that handbag, and she was going to now collect designer handbags for victims of terror. And I thought that was very funny, but a lot of people didn't understand that was supposed to be very funny. But you understand that, right? Okay. I think in terms of film.
Recommend one particular book that you see it already in your mind becoming a movie.
There's no question that my book Sota is already a movie. You read it and you already see the scenes, and the same is true of The Covenant for sure. It's a adventure story about how someone's kidnapped, and it takes place within a 24-hour period. And I think it would make a very nail-biting adventure story about how someone gets rescued or not rescued from a kidnapping. And I think that probably my latest book, The Sisters Weiss, takes place in America, and it's the story of many women. It's the story of our age and the conflicts that we have within our families. So yes, Hollywood, here it is.
I want to ask you, you almost started a new movement. So there is women that calling you saying, because of your book, I got the courage to do something with my life. If you remember one story.
I have women calling me all the time. One woman called me who told me that because of what she read in one of my books, she was really on the edge of suicide and she decided not to kill herself. That was an amazing story, and I just gave a lecture today, and a woman came over to me, completely secular, said she'd always rejected anything to do with Judaism. She didn't want anything to do with it because she thought it was all, ultra-Orthodox fanatics, and she felt that, she shouldn't learn anything about it. But after listening to my lecture and about what I had to say about the Sisters Weiss, she said she was going to start looking into who she was as a Jew, and I got great satisfaction from that. And I hope that I've given women the courage, especially ultra-Orthodox women, to write about their lives, and more people are doing it. And when I started, no one was doing it, and the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, they had a cartoon where they made fun, where they had a picture of an ultra-Orthodox woman in a head covering on a computer typing with her little kids running around with peot. I didn't see anything funny about that. It was like, look at the monkey, she thinks she knows how to write. And I didn't think that was funny. But the door was really closed in our faces for many years because people didn't think that anything in the ultra-Orthodox world was worth reading about. And I'm very happy that the door's been opened.
At the beginning of this interview, you mentioned that most of your story is not fiction. It's stuff that happened to someone or to you. And I was testing myself. When I see a headline before the movie stars based on a true story, it means a lot to me. And the movie gets another dimension. So I feel that it's beautiful. But other people that you write in about their life, did you meet them to make the research? You're choosing a person, like you said, with a black baby to a white family, right?
Right.
Did you meet this family and research about them?
This is the story. I never met these people. I have no idea who they are. This was an article in a newspaper about a ultra-Orthodox couple in Bnei Brak that had a black baby. That's all I knew. It was a paragraph. But when I started writing the book, and the newspaper also mentioned that they found out that the grandmother of the baby had been raped by a black man in Brooklyn, and that was the source of the child's skin color. But I didn't know, when I was writing the book, how would an ultra-Orthodox woman feel who had been raped? How could I write realistically about that? Something as terrible as that. No ultra-Orthodox woman ever wrote a book about that where she expressed her feelings. They never talk about that openly. And I was sort of desperate to get information about that. And what happened to me was I was at a lecture that I gave in Borough Park. I was very nervous about giving this lecture because the hall was filled with yeshiva students, rabbis' wives in, wigs, and it was just the kind of audience that I was afraid was going to be very critical of me. And I had no idea how many people were there either because I was waiting off stage. And when I got on stage, I saw the room was packed. It wasn't an empty space, and this was in the middle of Borough Park, and it was all ultra-Orthodox people. And I thought they were going to tar and feather me and run me out of town. I was really afraid to open my mouth. And then before I say anything, a woman gets up and she says, I'm a Rebbitzin, and I want to thank you for writing these books and saying all the things that I couldn't say. So I was thrilled. Then when I gave the lecture, I mentioned that I had a problem, that I was writing my next book about an ultra-Orthodox woman that's raped by a black man in Brooklyn. After the lecture, this young woman came down the aisle, and she approached me, and she said in a very low whisper, she said, I have personal knowledge of the subject of your next book. Well, my heart sort of skipped a beat, and I said, what does that mean? That means it means she was raped. So I said to her, wow. I said, would you be willing to talk to me about this? Because I've been racking my brain trying to find this information, and I can't find it anywhere. She said, I haven't even told my mother about this. I've never spoken to anybody about this. So I said to her, I'm going to be at the airport. I'm leaving for Israel. If you feel that you want to speak to me about it, then come to the airport, to JFK, and we'll sit in the lounge over there. No one will know it's you. No one will know it's me. And the day after that, her brother got married. So she had a choice to tell and ruin the wedding, or to take the whole burden of the sorrow on herself and not to say anything. And I thought that was one of the bravest things I ever heard, was that she didn't tell anybody so that everybody could have a good time at the wedding. She was a very brave woman. And I put it all in my book. So is the book true? It's true. Did I speak to the people it happened to? No. But you don't have to speak to the people that it happened to in order to be able to write a true story.
I'm going to ask you a question. It's going to be really hard to answer. Do you have a favorite book?
Well, it's like asking me if I have a favorite child. And I always answer that it's always your baby, and your baby's your last book that you put out. So I guess right now I would have to say The Sister's Weiss is my favorite book. But every single book that I've ever written is a part of me, and I feel like I know the characters, and they're out there somewhere living their lives, and maybe one day they'll call, they'll write, they'll come to visit, and I feel sad when I finish a book that I'm probably never going to see them again. But one day I want to do a sequel, and all of my characters from all of my books are going to meet, and that's my dream.
Thank you for this interview.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for watching.